talk about the history of making Ford. Ford Motor Company, American Automotive Corporation, founded in 1903 by Henry Ford and 11 associate investors. In 1919, the company was reincorporated, with Ford, his wife, Clara, and his son, Edsel, acquiring full ownership. They, their heirs, and the Ford Foundation, formed 1936, were sole stockholders until January 1956, when public sale of the common stock was first offered. The company manufactures passenger cars and trucks as well as automotive parts and accessories. Headquarters are in Dearborn, Michigan. Henry Ford built his first experimental car in a workshop behind his home in Detroit in 1896. After formation of the Ford Motor Company, the first Ford car, the original Model A, was assembled at the Mack Avenue plant in July 1903. 5 years later, in 1908, the highly successful Model T was introduced. Demand for this car was so great that Ford developed new mass production methods in order to manufacture it in sufficient quantities. In 1911, he established the industry's first U.S. branch assembly plant in Kansas City, Missouri, and opened the company's first overseas production plant in Manchester, England. In 1913, he introduced the world's first moving assembly line for cars, and in 1914, to further improve labor productivity, he introduced the $5 daily wage for an 8-hour day, replacing $2.34 for a 9-hour day. Assembly line production allowed the price of the Model T touring car version to be lowered from $850 in 1908, equivalent to about 18 months' salary for an average wage, to less than $300 in 1925, equivalent to about 4 months' salary for an average wage. Ford Motor Company, factory in Dagenham, England. Image, Encyclopaedia Britannica, Inc. The company's first international sales branch opened in Paris in 1908. By mid-1914 there were more than 500,000 Model Ts on the roads of the world. By 1923 the company was producing more than half of America's automobiles, and by the end of the 1920s, Ford had more than 20 overseas assembly plants in Europe, Latin America, Canada, Asia, South Africa, and Australia. The Ford had become the world's most familiar make of car, with 15 million Model Ts having been produced. In 1927 the last Model T and the first new Model A were produced, followed in 1932 by the first Ford V8. In 1922 Ford had acquired the Lincoln Motor Company, founded 1917, which would produce Ford's luxury Lincolns and Continentals. In 1938 Ford introduced the first Mercury, a car in the medium price range between Ford and Lincoln. Roy Brown Jr. Edsel. Image, Ralph Fountain. Las Vegas Review-Journal, AP Images. As early as 1906 Henry Ford had acquired 58.5% of the company's stock, and when the other stockholders balked at the idea of building the giant, and expensive, River Rouge plant in Dearborn, he bought them out. Edsel Ford, 1893 to 1943, became president, 1919. In 1942, the Ford Motor Company stopped production of civilian cars to concentrate on building cars, planes, and tanks for the U.S. military. On Edsall's death in 1943, Henry Ford returned to the presidency, but in 1945 he turned it over to his grandson, Henry Ford II, who reorganized the company's tangled system of financial management and reinvigorated its corporate culture by hiring talented younger managers such as Robert McNamara, who was briefly president of Ford before leaving to become Secretary of Defense in 1961. Under Henry Ford II's leadership, the company introduced such models as the Thunderbird, 1954, and the Mustang, 1964. However, the failed introduction of the Edsall, model years 1958 to 60, which was so disastrous that Edsall became a slang synonym for fiasco, occurred amid these successes. Henry Ford II guided the company as Chief Executive Officer, 1945–70, and Chairman of the Board, 1960–80. Ford in the 21st Century. In December 2008, U.S. Pres. George W. Bush announced an emergency financial rescue plan to aid the Big Three automakers Chrysler LLC, General Motors Corporation, and Ford to prevent the collapse of the country's struggling auto industry. The plan made immediately available $13.4 billion in government loans from the Troubled Assets Relief Program, TARP, a $700 billion fund approved by Congress to aid the financial industry following the subprime mortgage crisis. The loans would allow the auto companies to continue operating through March 2009, when they were required to demonstrate financial viability or return the money. An additional stipulation required the companies to undergo restructuring. The money was initially made available to General Motors and Chrysler. Ford purportedly possessed adequate funds to continue operations and, thus, did not immediately require government relief. Able to avoid bankruptcy, for which both General Motors and Chrysler filed, Ford experienced increased sales and market share in 2009. The growth was partially due to the federal government Cash for Clunkers plan, which gave consumers up to $4,500 toward trade-ins of older cars for new fuel-efficient models. In addition, Ford adopted various cost-cutting measures and focused on stronger brands. In 2010, the automaker sold Volvo to the Chinese company Zhejiang Geely Holding. Several months later, Ford announced that it would discontinue its Mercury line. However, as sales became sluggish, the automaker looked to expand its products. In 2016, Ford Smart Mobility was created to develop car-sharing ventures and self-driving vehicles, among other initiatives. The following year, the automaker announced that it was increasing its line of electric cars. However, in 2018, Ford announced that it was phasing out all its passenger cars, except the Mustang and Ford Focus Active. Instead, the company was going to focus on pickups. Ford's F-Series of pickups were the best-selling vehicles in the United States in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, SUVs, and crossover vehicles.